Hi everyone, welcome to the fashion analysis of Georgia O'Keeffe's linen blouse from the Living Modern book. I was originally going to look at both a blouse and a few other examples at the same time, but I think the blouse actually deserves a whole fashion analysis to itself. So in this tutorial I'm going to look at just the blouse and some 1930s and 1950s example of a sort of similar type of workmanship, just so that you can see it a bit closer up, like the pin tucking, how amazing they are, and always sort of the seams, how fine they are. And then in the second part of the linen blouse, I'm going to actually show you in a tutorial on Friday how to change your shaping darts into lots of tiny pin tucks. So this is going to be a two-part series. Today is going to be a fashion analysis and analysis of some actual clothes, and then on Friday there's going to be a drafting tutorial to follow. And then next week I'm going to look at some more really nice examples of fashion. I thought rather than mixing it all up, I give the blouse the attention it deserves. So let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at the Georgia O'Keeffe blouse. You can see it here quite clearly. There's also a close-up on this page where you can really see the detail. And I'm a tiny bit confused. There might be a sort of getting lost in translation a bit between American English and British English, because they're saying they're entirely handmade. So I assumed at first that everything was completely hand stitched, like all the pin tucks. But when reading the whole text, they seem to define handmade more that she made it herself, and the fabric didn't come from like this with all the pin tucks. So I'm guessing, and looking at the blouses from the same time, that I think the pin tucks might be made with a sewing machine over her, or it might be handmade. I'm not 100% sure. The hems are definitely handmade because they're rolled, which is a very tricky technique. It's the same as a silk scarf. And then again, the bias binding around the collar looks like it's hand stitched, but then here right in the corner it looks like it's machine stitching. So I'm not 100% sure. I would assume a machine made, just because of the time it takes to do this. But if you disagree, or if you've seen it in real life, let me know what you think. I'm gonna check I can see it properly. Okay. So this image, I hope you can see it properly on the screen. I'm gonna take a close-up photograph as well, just to make sure you can see the details. But I'm gonna draw it out at the same time. And what is special is all these patterns of, hopefully be able to find again, of pin tucks, which are both on the decoration, which is sort of a very stylized blouse, and all of the bodies. And unlike a lot of other tops I've seen, what makes them really special is that the pin tucks aren't even. They are chevron shaped or zigzag. So over the shape of a blouse, I think it's quite got a normal sleeve, maybe slightly narrower than normal. But you would have to sort of see her wearing it. Then it has got a bit of shaping on the side. So it's got a very slightly curved side seam. I would assume it's sort of high hip length, because that's your bust and this is your waist. So it sort of probably hits in between your waist and your hip. And especially if you think back when trousers and skirts, they're high-waisted. So this wouldn't be a very long blouse. Then it's got either a facing or turn up hem, and you can see the pin tucks go all the way in the hem, which means I would assume it's a facing, because if you have a turn up hem with all the pin tucks, it sort of becomes quite messy because they sort of would wrap around and become quite bulky and sort of fight each other. But if you have a seam allowance there and then you have a separate facings, you can smooth it out on the inside. And probably the same here and here. Then on the back it's got a little keyhole, and it's actually got several buttons on the keyhole, so not just one but two. And on the close-up picture you can actually see there's a piece of mending on the keyhole, which was probably a straining point, so she might have made it a tiny bit too tight, or if you move and it's a very fine linen fabric, it might over time just, that's like a sort of a point where all your stretch goes when you move your arms and your shoulders, so naturally tear sooner or later. But it's quite nice to see details like that. And then if you look at the sleeves, they're more or less a straight sleeve, but what I quite like, you got lots of pin tucks on the sleeve head, again in a geometric pattern, and then they're echoed at the bottom. So I'm just going to sketch them in, and then on the other side draw the proper sleeve. So I actually think it's probably quite a normal sleeve. She probably added a little bit of volume, and then she just has these pin tucks coming from the top and the bottom. If you want to, we can make a tutorial how to create really subtle detail like that, because it works similar to gathered cuff and a gathered hat, but it's a lot less, and it's probably partly use up your ease and you use up some of the width in your body sleeve, and you might just add a few centimeters. And there's so many, like I've drawn a few, but if you counted them, there'd probably be 15 on each side, so 30. So even if you, which is why I think it's made on a sewing machine, because even just doing 30 pin tucks on a machine takes a lot of time. But then if you're in the evenings, it might actually, for television, it might have been faster to do it on the hand. If you with a very fine chalk, you can probably draw on the lines and then just hand stitch. It might have been faster, but that's all the sort of details we don't really know about it. I've probably drawn the collar slightly too high. If you look at it, I think it's slightly lower, but that's why you sort of need to keep on looking, because I've drawn it like a crew neck, and I think it's a bit more flattering. So now we come to all the tiny little pin tucks. Interestingly, it's all pin tucks. Again, it's about, I would imagine, about 30 pin tucks across the hem. But then right at the end, there seems to be a little dart. I always find it quite fascinating, and the same might be the fabric. It looks like there's another dart down there. But this is why even with images you can only ever guess. But what's interesting again, that the pin tucks, they come nearly to the top, so maybe 0.5 centimeter near the neck, and then about 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeter at the shoulder, and then again they are in that chevron shape. So they become slowly shorter. So I would imagine you would have just drawn a line and then stitched them, which is why it might even be easier to do them by hand than machine stitch them. But whatever way you do them, it's a real labour of love. So I'm guessing there's around 30 again ear, because that's probably double that. So she might have even, you know, used exactly the same chevron on all the shapes, which I'm drawing really badly, because this is roughly the same as that, but then here it's actually a lot longer, so who knows. So on the front you have one which sort of goes probably right, you know where your solar plexus is, in between, like in the middle of your body. It's probably sort of going to your solar plexus. So it probably created really subtle, really elegant shaping. And when you actually got a gap in between the different, this is where you want a ruler, so you can draw really nicely. Oh, slightly wonky. But you can sort of see there's a little gap each side. And interesting enough, on the hanger, it sort of pulls it a bit, but I would imagine in real life, they're all parallel rather than wonky. So they all follow the same line. And then at the bottom, there are corresponding chevron shapes, which are slightly longer at the sides. So it's quite interesting. So I think, because this is like your underarm point, and it's roughly where this hits, and then your bust point is probably like here, and then below your bust point, a bit away, is where your chevron starts. So it's not a fully fitted style. I'm just looking. And there's a smaller gap here. They're probably all the same length. So she's really designed it, which is why I think they're saying that it's probably her own design. So I think the chevrons I think these are all the same width, and I think this is the same width as that. And I'm actually gonna count it for you, because I'm a bit sad later on, and just check. I want to see how they are actually identical, because they look slightly different. The middle one looks slightly wider, but sometimes the eye can play tricks on you if it's going around. I know it's hanging on a flat hanger, but it is a 3D garment, so that's slightly wonky. But then again, you've got these tiny pin tucks. So you know what? Some of you might want to create exactly this, but if I had the time, I probably would. But I think quite often, even if you don't do the full amount of pin tucks, you can still get that sort of effect where you have slightly looser, so that's not fully fitted, because of course it's similar to when we do a twin dart or something. We're moving slightly away from the bust point. Actually, this one, if you think about it, it moves quite a lot away from the bust point, if you think this is your bust. So all the dart shaping has actually been reduced. So instead of it sort of being shaped flat to your bust, you can see it here in the, I hope you can see it, there's these sort of greases, not greases, but it's sort of where you can see the fabric moves like this. And that's because it has a sort of loose shaping. So I'm in two minds at this time. I'm gonna think about it a bit more, whether it's purely the bust chart darting distributed into pin tucks, or whether there's a little bit of added volume, because of course if you think of 1930s style, it's not super fitted. It's sort of I'm gonna see if I can see any images of her wearing stuff. It has shape, but it isn't super shaped. So I'm wondering whether us interpreting this blouse as quite fitted, while in real life it's probably neat, might be the best word. So they call it city blouses or crisp linen. So I think it's a neat blouse, but it's not as fitted as we would think of nowadays. If you think about all of these, they're not super fitted. Because of course also with something like linen, if it was too fitted, it's such a fine linen, it would just start, all the seams would split. So I think it's something where you might even use your bodice block if it's got enough ease. You might use your hybrid relax block, or actually your no bastard block. So it's got that looseness of shape which you need with a non-stretchy fabric, but it's by then adding pin tucks you are actually creating some shaping. Might be an experiment. I'm gonna sort of find out when I actually create the draft tutorial for you. That's when I'm gonna find out whether extra volume is added, because if you count the pin tucks, and then if you say each pin tuck is maybe 2 mil, because I think stitched shut it's probably 1 mil. I'm gonna actually measure it on some 1930s pin tucks I have. So which means each time you take out 2 mil to 3 mil, so you can really work out how much you need to add to create 30 pin tucks, say. But yes, so this is my general analysis of this blouse. As you can see, sometimes with styles I can sort of work out how it's all made, but some of the stuff I won't find out how to draft it, because of course you've got another lot of pin tucks in the center front. So where you're creating a pin tucks, you are again adding a little bit of volume. So I think this might be the bastard, bastard, and then a bit of extra volume. We will find out. So this is my Fashionless of Georgia O'Keeffe. I'm now going to have a look at some examples of 1930s fashion for you. Now we've had a look at the Georgia O'Keeffe blouse, I thought I'd show you a few examples of 1930s cotton. Mine are more undershirts or undergarments, but just to show you sort of workmanship. And I'm just going to give you a quick overview, and then I'm actually going to take the camera off and look at a bit more detail. I just said they're all 1930s. I'm not 100% sure about this blouse. I think it might be 1950s, but you can't feel it. It's the most exquisite Swiss-made. I think in England they call it broderie anglaise, so English embroidery, but it's actually mostly made in Switzerland. The really fine stuff, or at least it is now. And I think it's 30s just because the workmanship is very fine. It's got a very fine cotton facing at the button stand, and there's lots of hand stitching. And also because it comes from my grandmother, and it wouldn't have been during the war, so it would have been either pre-war or post-war. And post-war she had children, so she wasn't that size anymore. Therefore I think it's from when she or her sister, it's from when they were young women in the 1920s or 30s. But this is just because it's got very fine lining, there's lots of hand stitching. But the examples I wanted to really show you, because I know they're from the 1930s, because they're from her trousseau, as they used to say. So all the nice bits you used to get when you were married, and then of course times changed, she didn't really wear them. But there's 3 examples of probably undershirts, but you can just see the workmanship. I'm going to show you in a detail. There's 2 tops. There's another sort of shift with very fine details. And then one I wanted to show you, which I'm actually 100% sure what it is, because undergarments have changed so much. I think it's another undershift. I don't think it's a nightie. I think nighties are probably bigger. But this has got the most amazing pin tuck details, similar to Georgia O'Keeffe's, but not as delicate. But I'm going to put this blouse, or this shift, whatever it's called, on the mannequin now, and then I'm going to look at it in a bit more detail. I've actually taken the shift dress off the mannequin because I couldn't see the details, so I'm going to show it to you flat on my table, so I can really zoom in and you can see the stitch line. And I'm actually going to now check how wide they are. And if you think what's interesting about this shift dress is, that you always got one sort of prominent pin tuck followed by two normal pin tucks. And that's quite nice because it sort of really it really sort of accentuate that there's lots of threes. And again, it creates sort of a geometric pattern similar to Georgia O'Keeffe. So let's have a quick look really close up, and I hope, yeah, there you go. So if I lay on my pattern master, it looks massive. You can see these pin tucks are literally 1 mil deep. So when you mark it, you would mark a line 2 mil deep, or use your special foot, because even the thicker pin tucks are only 3 mil deep. So it just shows you the position of the stitching. And it's quite tricky because this has never been worn, I think, or very rarely, because it's still pristine. But this Georgia O'Keeffe, a lot of the stitching has really stretched. So it could be either because it's been worn a lot, or it could be that it's hand stitched with a really tiny running stitch, if you know what I mean. So with a machine stitch in a way, the pin tucks are more secured. If you stitched by hand, you would probably just stitch like that, and that would give you this sort of slightly more. It's not zigzaggy, but if you look at, I'm gonna take a really close-up photo of the Georgia O'Keeffe. If you look at her pin tucks, they're not as straight as these. But yeah, I just wanted to show you a few details. This is actually machine made, the blouse. It's got some really nice lace. And I'm gonna try to close in again. But you can just see it's got like super fine, even the inside hems are very fine zigzag stitched. And of course the poor seamstresses who would have been working on, they probably would have had ruined eyesight by age 20 or something. But it is quite spectacular how nicely it's made. And all the stitching on these sort of old garments I've seen always have really fine stitching overall. Yes, and lots of really nice handiwork. But anyway, so I just want to show you this quickly so you can see how delicate it actually is in real life. Because even in a book you can't really see. Of course, ideally I'd like to show you in person, but hopefully you get a bit of an idea of how the pin tucks look. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this fashion analysis of Georgia O'Keeffe, and I hope the little film of the shift blouse was clear enough, because it's very hard to film white fabric clearly. But I'm trying to take a picture and put it in just so you can see how fine it is. And I've just spotted a really nice sleeve detail on here, so it might be another tutorial. But that's it for me for today, and I'm going to be back on Friday with a drafting tutorial.